The Guanches were the first known inhabitants of the Canary Islands off the coast of northwestern Africa, but their true origins have long been a mystery to archaeologists. They were accomplished astronomers, and for some, their mummification rituals link them to the ancient Egyptians, whilst for others, their legends suggest they could even be surviving inhabitants of Atlantis. New scientific evidence may have found the truth about these mysterious people. Recently, archaeological excavations revealed that the inhabitants of the Canary Island traded with Rome, and new DNA evidence has shed some light on the origins of the population. The Canary Islands are an autonomous community of Spain, consisting of an archipelago in the Atlantic Ocean, southwest of the Iberian Peninsula, and 76 miles off the coast of Morocco. The 8 main islands are Tenerife, Fuerteventura, Gran Canaria, Lanzarote, La Palma, La Gomera, El Hierro, and La Graciosa. The Canary Islands are volcanic islands and are essentially the peaks of a huge volcanic mountain range, now partially submerged. The first historical record of the islands so far discovered is from the 1st century Roman writer Pliny the Younger. An expedition to the islands was apparently sent by Juba II, the Roman client king of Numidia and Mauritania, in around 30 BC. Under the Roman Catholic Republic and Empire, Numidia consisted of a part of Africa north of the Sahara, corresponding roughly to the modern western Tunisia and eastern Algeria. It was during this expedition that the islands got their name of the Canary Islands because of the multitude of large dogs found there, the Roman word canis meaning dog. After the fall of the Roman Empire, we hear nothing of the islands for hundreds of years until around 1000 AD, when the Arabs landed and traded with the inhabitants of Gran Canaria. In 1150 AD, the Arab geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi compiled the first official account of the population of the islands, which consisted of short descriptions of sailors and traders' accounts of the time. During the 15th and 16th century, Spain and Portugal began colonizing the Americas and Africa, stopping off at the Canary Islands along the way. When they arrived on the Canary Islands, they encountered a culture that resembled the Neolithic cultures of prehistoric Europe. Complete Spanish conquest of the islands was completed in 1496, and they became a vital Spanish base on sea routes to the Americas. As a result of Spanish colonization, the diseases introduced by the European conquerors and the slave trade by the native Guanches of the island chain were decimated, losing much of their culture in the process. By the 19th century, the Canary Islanders had even lost their language as it came to be replaced by Spanish. There are still, however, some reminders of the once thriving culture of the Guanches of the Canary Islands. The Guanches. The Guanches were the first known inhabitants of the Canary Islands, the indigenous people when the Spanish arrived there in the 15th century. They lived mainly in natural caves or occasionally built low stone huts and small fortifications. The Guanches lived off farming and herding, had a diet which included milk, goat, pork and fruits, and dressed mainly in goatskin leather tunics and vests made of plaited rushes. Archaeological research suggests that they were organized in a tribal society ruled by chieftains or kings. The Guanches were not skilled sailors, and therefore the culture of each of the Canary Islands developed differently. In Tenerife, for example, the Guanche civilization was divided into 9 small kingdoms, each led by a ruling mensi. Caves were also used for grain storage and as temples, and some are still preserved today and demonstrate the sophisticated astronomical knowledge of the Guanches. The most impressive of these structures is Risco Caído, a vast cultural site covering around 18,000 hectares on the island of Gran Canaria. The archaeological site consists of 21 caves containing significant rock art believed to relate to magical or religious beliefs and fertility rituals. One of these caves has a small opening in its roof, where light enters from the summer solstice to autumn, allowed sunlight and moonlight to enter the caves and illuminate symbolic engravings on the walls. Because of this, many archaeologists think that Risco Caído could have been used by the prehistoric inhabitants as a primitive astronomical clock. Over the years, there have been a number of finds made in the Canary Islands which suggested some sort of contact with the Roman world. In 1964, a Roman amphora, storage jar, was discovered in waters off Lanzarote, and since that time other examples have been found underwater. None, however, could be securely dated. A few years ago, however, excavations on the island of Lanzarote uncovered the first securely dated evidence of Roman trade with the islands. Investigations at the prehistoric settlement of El Belvedere yielded around 100 Roman pot shards, 9 pieces of metal and 1 piece of glass. The artifacts were found in archaeological levels which indicate that they dated between the 1st and 4th centuries AD. Legends of Atlantis and Ancient Egypt. There are numerous legends surrounding the native people of the Canary Islands. Some believe they were somehow related to the Celts, or perhaps even the Vikings. Others that the Guanches were descended from the inhabitants of the mythical land of Atlantis. In this theory, Cape Verde, the Azores, Madeira and the Canary Islands would be the remains of this legendary sunken continent. A more recent theory connects the first settlers of the Canary Islands with the Berber Canary tribe. The Guanches have also been linked to ancient Egyptians, perhaps as a colony of that civilization because of their habit of mummifying their dead. It is a fact that the Guanches used similar methods to the ancient Egyptians when preserving the remains of their high-ranking citizens. After the mummification process, the bodies were buried underground or inside caves. Unfortunately, many of these mummies were stolen or looted by later grave robbers, though some have managed to survive. The Guanche mummy of Madrid is perhaps the best preserved of the Guanche mummies, as its careful embalming kept its organs intact and even preserved the man's hair. The man, who died during his early 30s, was mummified between the 11th and 13th centuries AD, just a few centuries before the Spanish invaded the Canary Islands. New DNA evidence. In June 2019, it was announced that DNA studies had resolved many of the outstanding questions regarding the origins of the Guanches. Dr. Linus Girdland-Flink, a researcher at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK, who was part of the research team, stated, "Previous studies of the Guanches relied on single genetic markers, such as the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes. These markers often lack the analytical precision needed to resolve finer levels of population history. By sequencing autosomal DNA, we gained unique insights to the ancestry and origin of these populations." The researcher team generated the genome-wide sequence data and mitochondrial genomes from 11 Guanche individuals originating from archaeological sites in Gran Canaria and Tenerife. Leading author of the study, Dr. Ricardo Rodriguez Varela, a researcher at Stockholm University, explained the results of the team's fascinating study. By generating the first autosomal genetic data from these populations, we can conclusively demonstrate that the Guanches were most closely related to modern North Africans of Berber ancestry than to any other population we included for comparisons, supporting previous studies but adding more detail and nuance. The study was also able to show that the modern inhabitants of Gran Canaria inherited between 16 and 31% of their genomic ancestry from the Guanches. The Berbers spread throughout North Africa more than 3,000 years ago, occupying what is today the area from Libya to the Sahara. Rosa Friegel, a geneticist at La Laguna University, who took part in the research, said of the results, "Thanks to DNA analysis, we've been able to dispel the notion that the Guanches were practically Vikings, tall, blonde and blue-eyed. Everything indicates that they came from North Africa and were physically similar to the Berbers. White skin with a tendency to an olive complexion and brown eyes that could be light-colored in some cases." Clichés and legends notwithstanding, the ancient inhabitants of the Canary Islands were not so different from today's. But the question is, if the original inhabitants of the Canary Islands came from North Africa, how and when did they arrive? Archaeologists believe that there were two major migrations, the first around 2,500 years ago, and the second one at around the 1st century AD, when North Africa was part of the Roman Empire. They are believed to have made the crossing in relatively small vessels, although no remains of these have ever been found. In February 2020, it was announced that the mummified remains of 72 individuals had been discovered by amateur archaeologists using a drone in a cave on Gran Canaria. Aros Himar Gonzalez, who made the incredible discovery, said, "We were flying a drone and we took some pictures of the cave. It is in a very difficult place to access and you need to climb a cliff to reach the site. People thought the photos were fake because of all the bones there, but they were not fake and the bones are believed to belong to Guanche's mummified remains." Archaeologists Veronica Alberto and culture counsellor Javier Velasca confirmed the discovery, stating that the cave dates back to between the 8th and 10th centuries AD. A few years ago, newspapers all over the world carried the story that ancient history researcher Robert Sarmast has located the lost continent of Atlantis off the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Sonar scanning apparently revealed man-made structures in the water around the island, 1 mile beneath sea level. Sarmast believed that the Mediterranean basin was flooded in 9000 BC, which submerged a rectangular landmass which he maintains was Atlantis. Although archaeologists at the time dismissed Sarmast's claims out of hand, new evidence suggests there may indeed be an ancient city submerged in the waters around Cyprus. Almost every year without fail, the headline "Atlantis Found" blares out from various newspapers all over the world. In fact, the range of hypothetical locations for Atlantis is staggering. The Minoan civilization of late Bronze Age Crete, supposedly destroyed by a colossal earthquake on the neighboring island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1450 BC, was long thought to have been an indirect influence on Plato's Atlantis. However, research into late Bronze Age Crete has shown that the Minoan civilization continued to flourish long after the Theran quake. This vast array of wildly different theories has contributed to the skepticism of many researchers, who believe that Plato's Atlantis was merely a political allegory designed to glorify Athens as the perfect state fighting against a decadent and greedy Atlantean empire. For them, the story begins and ends with Plato. Solon never visited Egypt and heard the story from the priests at Sais. They reason that Plato located Atlantis out in the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules, because in his time this vast ocean represented the limit of the world known to the Greeks. Atlantis researchers, of course, would completely disagree with this conclusion. Indeed, one of them, Iranian-American architect Robert Sarmast, believes he knows exactly where Atlantis is. Did Robert Sarmast find Atlantis off Cyprus? Sarmast first hit the headlines in November 2004 when newspapers carried the story that after nearly 10 years of research using ocean mapping technology and accounts from ancient texts, he'd located Atlantis off Cyprus. Sarmast was quoted as saying, "This is going to rewrite the history books. We are set to make the biggest archaeological discovery of all time." He claimed that around 9000 BC, the Mediterranean basin was flooded in a deluge that submerged a rectangular, man-made site which he believed was Atlantis. The lost civilization apparently lay around 5,000 feet below sea level, 50 miles or so off the southeastern coast of Cyprus. Sarmast and his team had carried out deep-water sonar scanning, which indicated man-made structures on a submerged hill, including a wall almost 3 miles long, a walled hill summit, and deep trenches. Sarmast's 6-day expedition cost about $200,000 and was partly funded by the Cypriot Tourist Organization. Sarmast was quoted at the time as saying of his discoveries, "It is a miracle we found these walls, as their location and lengths match exactly the description of the Acropolis of Atlantis provided by Plato in his writings. We cannot yet provide tangible proof in the form of bricks and mortar, as the artifacts are still buried under several meters of sediment. But the circumstantial and other evidence is irrefutable. My discovery will vindicate Plato. Within his dialogues, Plato provides factual clues as to what Atlantis was like. I have matched all but 2 of the 45 clues with the area around Cyprus. That's either the biggest coincidence in the history of the world, or we have found Plato's Atlantis. Plato's account is so detailed that it is possible to make city plans based on his description. These match exactly the antediluvian maps of Cyprus as discovered through oceanographic mapping. Sarmas had in fact revealed his discoveries the year before he hit the newspaper headlines in a book entitled Discovery of Atlantis, The Startling Case for the Island of Cyprus. At a 2004 press conference to announce his discoveries, Sarmas was challenged by Michel Morisseau, a French geologist who lives on Cyprus, to provide evidence that the Mediterranean had been flooded far more recently than the conventionally accepted 5 million years. Unfortunately, Sarmas was not able to provide any evidence whatever to back up his claims. Despo Pilides, an archaeologist at the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus, said of Sarmas' claims, "The latest theory should be taken with a very large pinch of salt. Archaeologists only work with hard evidence. There is no evidence whatsoever to give credence to this hypothesis, and we have no intention of investigating it." Commenting on Sarmas' interpretation of the sonar results, Benny Pisa, a social anthropologist at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK, criticised his far-fetched theories and unscientific approach. Selective interpretation is nothing more than the blinkered reading of very ambiguous and unconvincing images, he said. Anyone with a critical eye can pick out these images that they're far too vague and uncertain to be regarded as compelling evidence for any man-made structures. The very foundation on which the hoax is based is completely bogus. According to his theory, Mr. Sarmas claims that the Mediterranean basin was flooded in a deluge at around 9000 BC, which submerged a rectangular landmass he believes was Atlantis. The problem is, there is no evidence whatsoever for any large-scale flooding of the Mediterranean basin at that time. Not to be deterred, Sarmas organized a second expedition to the site in 2006, but results of the work were inconclusive. He returned to Cyprus in June 2011 to film a documentary in support of his Atlantis theory. He again had the backing of the Cyprus Tourism Organization, as well as the History Channel, together with a number of private investors. However, Sarmas appears to have made no further discoveries at the supposed site of Atlantis, and nothing has been heard from him on the subject since 2013. New discoveries off Cyprus. However, the theory that ancient Atlantis may lie submerged in the waters off Cyprus does not seem to be dead yet. In April 2018, Cypriot newspaper The Cyprus Traveller announced that a chance discovery by a group of tourists had led a team of marine archaeologists to the location of Atlantis, off the coast of Paphos, a coastal city in southwest Cyprus. The team, led by archaeologist Marios Astio, used luge cutting-edge sonar technology to scan the ocean bed. After further surveillance, deep ground radar and digital mapping, a team was sent to the ocean floor where they discovered an ancient statue of Aphrodite. After extensive analysis, Professor Kostas Anotos from Cyprus University's Department of Antiquities authenticated the relic and confirmed that the extraordinary find was the first artifact that categorically proved that the great and wonderful empire of Atlantis was located off the coast of Paphos. A large-scale operation to recover further artifacts and building remains was soon underway, with the Cyprus Tourism Organization also planning to put out a tender for the building of a Paphos-based Atlantis museum. Marios Astio commented on the spectacular discoveries. Over the centuries, there's been heated debate over whether Atlantis was a mythical or historical location, with hundreds of archaeologists and geologists searching for its location. In fact, the reason I became a marine archaeologist was to try to discover the true location of Atlantis. Having completed my lifetime goal, I'm looking forward to enjoying an early retirement. He added, I was astounded when I heard that Astio and his team had discovered the location of the lost city of Atlantis, mainly because my great-grandmother always used to tell us Atlantis could be found at that exact spot in the ocean. No one listened to her, of course. It seemed the old bird was right. Marina Milona, a marketing and tourism officer at the Cyprus Tourism Organization, added, it's been long rumored that the lost city of Atlantis was located just off the coast of Cyprus, and we're delighted that this has been officially confirmed. The ruins of a 2,500-year-old lost ancient civilization were recently found in a lake in Kyrgyzstan. Some researchers believe that these ancient remains may include an ancient Armenian monastery where, according to legend, the body of St. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, and his many relics were buried. A number of Orthodox Christians have long believed that Matthew was finally laid to rest here long after his death. Since the 19th century, Russian scientists, archaeologists and researchers from the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences have studied ancient relics around Issyk-Kul Hot Lake, one of the world's highest and deepest lakes, located in a valley in the high Central Asian mountains in the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. Issyk-Kul Lake is 113 miles long, up to 37 miles wide, and has an area of 2,408 square miles. It reaches 2,192 feet in depth. The lake was first mentioned by Chinese and Islamic mapmakers at the beginning of the 8th century. Archaeological finds from the site have included petroglyphs and 3,000-year-old nomadic burial mounds known as kurgans, early Christian monasteries and medieval cities. The lake has long held a fascination for researchers as divers have been exploring its depths since as long ago as the 1860s. There was a significant rise in the water level of the lake at the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th. As a result of this, the remains of various ancient cultures were submerged, including Bronze Age settlements, Saki Usuni burial mounds of the 1st century BC, medieval towns and settlements, and Turkic monuments. Since 1985, Professor Vladimir Flosky, Vice President of the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences, has been directing underwater surveys and excavations at Issyk-Kul, and in 2010 he joined forces with National Geographic to explore the extraordinary history of the lake. In September 2013, scientists and archaeologists from National Geographic began investigations at the lake. The team chose this site due to its position at an important location along the legendary Silk Road, with routes running along its shores. In the past, innumerable traders, caravans and nomadic tribes and armies traveled along the 113-mile-long lake, leaving an extraordinary archaeological legacy behind. The Silk Road was an ancient trade route linking China with the West, along which goods and ideas were carried between the two great civilizations of Rome and China, and later between medieval European kingdoms and China. In the Middle Ages, the area surrounding the lake was fought over by two opposing lines of descendants from Genghis Khan, the Eastern Mongols and the city-dwelling Islamic Western Mongols. The legendary Western Mongol leader, Tamerlane, was said to have fought a battle over the lake region in the early 1400s, and there are medieval records of a palace built by the conqueror on the lake shore, Issyk-Kul. Some researchers believe it's the same structure as the 15th century palace near the town of Cholpon Ata, described by the medieval Arab historian Ibn Arab Sheikh. In December 2007, it was announced that Russian researchers had discovered important ancient remains of previously unknown culture beneath the lake. According to reports, Russian archaeologists discovered traces of a large city with an area of several square kilometers. In other words, it was a metropolis in its time. We also found Scythian burial mounds, eroded by waves over the centuries, and numerous well-preserved artifacts. Bronze battle axes, arrowheads, self-sharpening daggers, objects discarded by smiths, casting molds, and a faceted gold bar, which was a monetary unit of the time. In August of 2014, Russian news outlets published a story that divers from Tomsk State University had located another previously unknown ancient settlement beneath the lake, along with 200 artifacts. Perhaps the most fascinating find was a piece of large ceramic pot which had a stamp on it written in Armenian and Syrian scripts. This find may have been supporting evidence for the story that an Armenian monastery existed on this site in medieval times. According to Dmitry Gorn, who led the diving team, the inscribed pot fragment was truly unique. He added, "Experts are now working on the identification of the writings of the stamps, but it's supposed to be Armenian Syrian script. If this proves to be correct, it will be further evidence that there was an Armenian monastery on Issyk Kul in the 14th century, where, according to the legends, relics of Matthew were stored." There is indeed a tradition that a monastery on this remote lake was the last resting place of evangelist St. Matthew, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. Intriguingly, when the Russian traveller P.P. Semenov was in Venice in the 1850s, he came upon a copy of the Catalan Atlas from 1375. In this work he found a drawing of a lakeside monastery with the caption, "The spot is named Issyk. Here is a monastery of Armenian brethren which is rumoured to possess the relics of St. Matthew the Apostle and Evangelist." The extraordinary Catalan Atlas is a perpetual calendar and thematic representation of the known world produced by the Majorcan Cartographic School. The creation of the atlas has been attributed to Abraham Kresk, a Jewish cartographer from Palma, Majorca. Semenov believed that the monks probably chose a site on the Kermenti Bay, as the site was protected from rough water and rich with fish. After visiting Issyk Kul in 1856-57, Semenov wrote, "Kermenti Bay meets these conditions, but I unfortunately did not find on the shore, nor in the drifts of the neighbouring shore, any object supporting my supposition." 50 years later, a Russian Orthodox monastery was built in the area. However, many Christians believe that Matthew the Apostle's remains were discovered in Salerno, Italy, in 1080, and are now in Salerno Cathedral, which is dedicated to the saint. Apparently, St. Matthew's relics had been brought to the town in 954 AD. St. Matthew, also called St. Matthew the Evangelist and St. Matthew the Apostle, was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ and the traditional author of the first synoptic gospel, the Gospel according to Matthew. According to the calling of Matthew in the biblical book of Matthew, he had been a tax collector before being called to follow Jesus. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." According to tradition, Matthew's missions later brought him to the east, perhaps Ethiopia and Persia. Stories differ as to whether he died a natural death or that of a martyr. According to another tradition, he died as a martyr in Syria, and his relics were kept there for 150 years. Apparently, his followers later fled from persecution to the depths of Asia, bringing the relics of the apostle with them. Yet another tradition holds that St. Matthew died while traveling to India and established several Christian communities on his way, one of which was Issyk Kul. It's known that a thriving Christian Armenian community existed in Kyrgyzstan since the 1st century AD. Many artifacts were found in Chu Valley, a large valley located in North Tian Shan, including an engraved stone with a cross carrying an Armenian inscription, "Jesus our Lord." A Syrian inscription under the cross stated, "This is the grave of Johann, the Armenian bishop," and a date 772 in Armenian chronology corresponding to 1323 AD. In medieval times, 2 Armenian monasteries stood near one of the villages on the shore of the lake, Svetli Mis, Bright Cape. More evidence that the remains of St. Matthew may have ended up in an Armenian monastery on the lake comes from the late 19th century, When Baron Korbas, Russian general and explorer of Central Asia, traveled to the site, he wrote, "It is worth noting that not far from the Trinity Monastery, at the confluence of rivers Tayup and Koisu, ruins of an ancient town are found underwater. The town hosted the Armenian monastery guarding the relics of St. Matthew." Archaeological investigation of the Kermonti settlements began in 2005, when an exploratory team visited the site of the monastery and settlement. Finds from the area include bronze crosses, a signet ring with ornamentation, colored beads, and more than 24 crucifix necklaces. Only ongoing continuous archaeological expeditions and detailed historical research can solve the mysteries of Issyk Kul. Nevertheless, some people are convinced that this site is indeed the location of the lost Armenian monastery, and possibly the remains of St. Matthew. According to Hindu legend, there was once a mystical kingdom located in the middle of the sea. The city was home to 900 palaces, all made of gold, and was supposed to have arisen out of the waters on the command of Lord Krishna. Recently, underwater archaeologists claim to have located what some believe to be the foundations of this fabulous lost city off the coast of modern Dwarka in western India. Char Dham, literally meaning the four abodes or seats, are the names of four pilgrimage sites in India that are widely revered by Hindus. It comprises of Badrinath, Dwarka, Puri, and Rameswaram. Dwarka is often identified with the Dwarka kingdom, the ancient kingdom of Krishna, and is believed to have been the first capital of Gujarat. According to legend, Krishna founded the city in Gujarat's west coast after he defeated and killed his uncle Kansa at Mathura. In Indian epic literature, the ancient city is also known as Dwarka. Traditionally, modern Dwarka is identified with Dwarka. Ancient Dwarka is supposed to have sank into the sea in remote history. The ancient and modern city, now known as Dwarka, is located on the western tip of the Saurashtra Peninsula in Gujarat, northwestern India. In the 14th century, the town's original temples were destroyed by the Delhi emperors, but the most important of them, Jagat Mandir, was subsequently rebuilt. Jagat Mandir, also known as the Dwarkadish Temple, is a Hindu temple dedicated to god Krishna, who is worshipped here with the name of Dwarkadish, or the King of Dwarka. The 5-story sandstone edifice is supported by 72 pillars and was constructed in the 15th to 16th centuries in the Chalukya style. It covers an area of 69 by 88.5 feet, with its spire a dizzying 257 feet high. The temple is visited by thousands of pilgrims every year. Ancient Dvakra is mentioned in a number of Indian texts, including the Mahabharata, the Shrimad, and the Bhagavad Gita. The Mahabharata describes Dvarka as having 900,000 royal palaces, all constructed of crystal and silver and decorated with emeralds. The ancient city was connected by an elaborate system of boulevards, roads, marketplaces, assembly houses, and temples. Archaeological investigations in the city of Dwarka and offshore in the Arabian Sea have been undertaken by the Archaeological Survey of India since the 1960s. Over the past decade or so, underwater excavations have uncovered interesting remains at a depth of 120 feet in the Gulf of Cambay off the western coast of India. Some reports claim these discoveries could be over 9,000 years old and cover an area 5 miles long and 2 miles wide. Marine archaeologists have used a technique known as sub-bottom profiling to reveal that the building's remains stand on enormous foundations. One news report in the New Indian Express from August 2018 stated sensationally, marine scientists say archaeological remains discovered 36 meters, 120 feet underwater in the Gulf of Cambay off the western coast of India could be over 9,000 years old. It's believed to predate the oldest known remains in the subcontinent by more than 5,000 years. Carbon dating on debris recovered from the site, including construction material, pottery, sections of walls, beads, sculpture, and human bones and teeth, put it at nearly 9,500 years old, making it older than the Sumerian civilization by several thousand years. It's also older than the Egyptian and Chinese civilizations. The city is believed to be even older than the ancient Harappan civilization. Sandstone walls and a grid of streets and other evidence of a seaport 70 feet underwater, alongside artifacts dating back to 7,500 BC, have convinced some researchers that finally the legendary city of 900,000 royal palaces has been located. The archaeological explorations off the coast of Dwarka have also brought to light a large number of stone structures. These are semicircular, rectangular, and square stone edifices scattered randomly over a vast area. Besides these structures, many varieties of stone anchors have been uncovered alongside the structures as well. Such findings suggest that the ancient Dwarka was once a busy port, though these structures are thought to date to comparatively late in the site's history, probably belonging to the late medieval period. Indeed, various Indian historians have stated that the stone anchors match those used in the Indo-Arab trade from the 8th to 14th century AD. However, this recent date has not stopped some from claiming that the remains represent the legendary lost city of Dwarka and so must be 9,000 years old. The lead archaeologist of a number of excavations at the site, the late Dr. S.R. Rao, described the town plan of early Dwarka based on his team's discoveries. There were 2 fortification walls, one on the lower terrace and other in the middle terrace. These walls, which extend over a length of 4 kilometers on the eastern shore, are mostly destroyed by sea action. The walls of the lower terrace are of massive dressed sandstone blocks, while that of the upper terrace are of rubble. The houses and other public buildings, built of smaller size stones within the enclosures, are all destroyed and leveled up by the encroachment of the sea. These structures lie at a depth of 7 to 10 meters below the present mean sea level, indicating a rise of 10 meters in sea level during the last 3,600 years. In the opinion of some researchers, the rise in sea level mentioned by Dr. Rao seems to indicate that ancient Dwarka was destroyed by a great flood. Indeed, for some archaeological proof of the existence of the Dwarka and its submergence, perhaps in the 2nd millennium BC, reflects the truth of the descriptions in the Mahabharata. For them, the finds would make the Mahabharata not merely a book of myths and legends, but to some extent a genuine account of past events. In September 2019, it seemed that final proof for the wonderful architectural achievements of ancient Dwarka have been discovered underwater off modern Dwarka. A Twitter user going by the name @JIKS shared 4 sensational photos showing ornately decorated underwater sculptures and structures, with one resembling a temple tower. There was a claim accompanying the image which stated, "Sri Krishna's Dwarka, the sunken city in Gujarat, as described in the Mahabharata. It is real, yet the Christian world says there is no proof." The tweet was retweeted over 1,500 times. However, subsequent research into the 4 images revealed the falseness of the claim. One image, showing the sculpture of a lion with its left paw resting on a ball, was traced to an underwater memorial reef near Key Biscayne in Miami, Florida. It is the largest man-made reef in the world and contains 2 statues of lions to mark the entrance to the site. It is a photo of one of these lions which was used on Twitter as proof of new discoveries from ancient Dwarka. The 3 other images were also traced to various other online sources, including various photoshopped composite images using various temple remains collected from all over the world. Consequently, it's obvious that the images used on Twitter have no connection whatsoever to ancient Dwarka. Indeed, the whole claim of a submerged civilization off the coast of Dwarka, dating back 9,000 years, rests on extremely shaky grounds. In the media accounts of the discoveries, the claim of the city being 9,000 years old is based entirely on one radiocarbon date from a single piece of wood. But this piece of wood could very easily have belonged to a tree that existed prior to these underwater remains. No other object from the excavations has actually been dated. Experts have pointed out that the area in which remains have been found has huge tidal movements which would have moved artifacts and even structures around, perhaps many miles from their original locations. Furthermore, many of these stone objects found seem to be geofacts rather than artifacts, that is, natural objects made by water and sand erosion. The argument that there's a submerged 9,000-year-old Dobraka in the area is based on the premise that a submerged coastal settlement could only have been built when sea levels were much lower, and therefore could only have been built before the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. The question of when and how the continent of Australia was first populated has always been a bit of a puzzle to archaeologists, but recently some new light has been shed on the problem. An international team of archaeologists, geographers, ecologists and computer scientists mapped the probable superhighways that led to the first peopling of the Australian continent around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. The team generated a fascinating map which reveals these migration superhighways traversed by early humans in Australia, which mysteriously bear striking similarities to Australia's modern highways and stock routes. Some researchers have also suggested a connection between these newly discovered superhighways and the mysterious Aboriginal dreaming tracks. Over the years, there have been many theories about where the indigenous ancestors first settled in Australia tens of thousands of years ago, but evidence for this activity is extremely scarce. Only a very small number of archaeological sites date from these early times when sea levels were much lower and northern Australia was joined by a land bridge to present-day southern New Guinea and eastern Indonesia, and people and animals were able to walk at various times across to Tasmania from the mainland. This megacontinent, known as Sahul, was 30% larger than Australia is today. One of these early archaeological sites was at the now dry Lake Mungo in western New South Wales. Here, in 1968, Earth scientist Jim Bowler uncovered the cremated remains of an Aboriginal woman in an eroding dune close to the shoreline of the lake. In 1974, the ancient remains of a man were found nearby. Both of these remains, now called Mungo Lady and Mungo Man, were found to date back to a staggering 40,000 years, thus doubling scientific estimates of how long Aboriginal people had lived in Australia. The amazing discoveries at Lake Mungo reveal that Aboriginal history stretched back at times so remote that the only humans in Europe were Neanderthals, and people had not yet reached America. By about 70,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, began moving into Southeast Asia, where they would probably have encountered existing groups of archaic humans like Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, often referred to as the hobbits, and possibly also the mysterious Denisovans. In May 2021, it was announced that researchers had used supercomputers to simulate 125 billion possible travel routes and reconstruct the most likely superhighways. The first humans to arrive in Australia used to navigate across this new land more than 65,000 years ago. The international team of scientists who undertook the research was led by researchers from the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Australian Biodiversity and Heritage, CABAR, and recently revealed some of their methods to the press. They said, "We think people navigated in new territories much as people do today, by focusing on prominent land features protruding above the relative flatness of the Australian continent. To map these features, we built the most complete digital elevation model for Sahul ever constructed, including areas now underwater. We used this digital elevation model to understand what was visible to early travelers. Essentially, from each point in the continent we asked, what can you see from here? This moving window calculates the largest viewshed map ever created. When our virtual travelers move, they reorient based on visible terrain everywhere they go. For their work, the researchers created an imaginary traveler, a 25-year-old woman carrying 10 kilograms of supplies to traverse the landscape. They collected all the various pieces of data they accumulated into a mega model known as From Everywhere to Everywhere, FEAT, and created over 125 billion possible pathways from every spot on the continent to everywhere else. Each route represented the easiest way to move from one location to another. Obviously, the researchers could not possibly examine every path of the 125 billion pathways that they had created, so they reduced the number by comparing all plausible pathways with the distribution of the oldest known archaeological sites on the ancient continent, providing weighted possibilities for each path. This work produced a scale of pathways going from the most likely to the least likely chosen paths. The most likely pathways in the map above are what the researchers called the superhighways of the first indigenous populations on the continent. The team's conclusion, drawn from their computer-generated maps, is that the early populations spread across the now submerged wide plains on the western and eastern margins of the continent and through to the region that now forms the Gulf of Carpentaria, the large shallow sea which now connects Australia to New Guinea. The nagging question of whether there was evidence that anyone had actually used these computer-identified highways in the remote past was soon answered by their research. A large number of archaeological sites in Australia, known to be at least 35,000 years old, were located on or near these superhighways, and many tracks also coincided with ancient trade routes known from the oral histories of the indigenous people, or agreed with genetic and linguistic studies used to trace early human migrations. But these superhighways may well have been much more than routes used for the initial peopling of Sahul. A number of these superhighways identified by the research team follow well-known Aboriginal trade routes which cross the country. These include the route from Cape York to South Australia via Birdsville, used by traders of Pituri native tobacco, and the trade of Kimberley Baler shell into Central Australia. There are also obvious similarities between the researchers' map of ancient highways and the most common trading and stock routes used by early Europeans, which is not surprising as they followed established routes long used by the Aboriginal peoples. The researchers' groundbreaking work on these superhighways has impressed the archaeological community. Archaeologist Kyle Bokinski of the University of Montana, Missoula, said, "This is a really compelling illustration of the power of using these simulation techniques at a huge continental scale to understand how people navigate landscapes. It's impressive, extreme computing." One intriguing aspect of this new research is that it has revealed major routes that cut across several dry areas in Australia's centre and in the northeastern state of Queensland. The existence of paths in such locations would appear to challenge the long-held view that the earliest people on the continent avoided the deserts. Kabah Deputy Director, Distinguished Professor Sean Ulm from James Cook University, commented on the importance of the research team's work in revealing the significance of landscape to the native inhabitants of the continent. He said, "Australia is not only the driest, but also the flattest populated continent on Earth. Our research shows that prominent landscape features and water sources were critical for people to navigate and survive on the continent. In many Aboriginal societies, landscape features are believed to have been created by ancestral beings during the dreaming. Every ridgeline, hill, river, beach and water source is named, storied and inscribed into the very fabric of societies, emphasizing the intimate relationship between people and place. The landscape is literally woven into people's lives and their histories. It seems that these relationships between people and the country probably date back to the earliest peopling of the continent." This quote brings in a question of a connection between these newly revealed superhighways and Aboriginal dreaming tracks. To the Aborigine, a dreaming track or songline, as it is also known, is a route taken by ancestral heroes in the dream time, in which all Aboriginal culture has its roots and before which, in their minds, the Earth did not exist. As with the ancient superhighways, these mostly invisible paths or tracks usually connect Aboriginal sacred sites. In the Dreamtime, groups of ancestral beings journeyed across the land, performing mighty deeds and creating the living species and features of the desert landscape. The adventure of these ancestors, also referred to as totemic ancestors, are chronicled in sacred songs, stories, and rituals. These totemic ancestors also established the rules of Aboriginal religion, law, moral systems, and social life. In the mind of the Aborigine Dreamtime is a true record of how the landscape was formed, a landscape which is still inhabited by the spirits of their ancestor beings. By reenacting the myths in the Dreamtime in song, story, and ceremony, the Aborigines keep their ancestors' rules, beliefs, and relationships with the landscape alive. The massive rock form of Ayers Rock, Uluru in the local Anagu language, is an isolated sandstone outcrop rising 1,140 feet above the Red Desert Plain in the Northern Territory of Central Australia, 208 miles southwest of Alice Springs. This sacred place is seen by the Anangu as a living record of the Dreamtime activities of their ancestors, and the appearance and origin of every feature of the giant rock is present on the mental map carried around by the Anangu people of the area. One reason why the local Anangu population prefer tourists not to climb the rock is that the hiking path crosses one of the many traditional dreaming tracks on the site. Hopefully future work on possible connections between these fascinating superhighways and Aboriginal dreaming tracks might reveal important insights into the spiritual nature of both. During the drought which resulted from the unusually hot summer of 2019, the shoreline of the Tagus River in central Spain receded, revealing a 6,000-year-old circular monument in the middle of the Valdecañas Reservoir. Known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal, this megalithic monument consists of more than 100 standing granite stones, some up to 6 feet tall, arranged in an 85-foot diameter circle. Some researchers believe that one of the stones in the monument has what may be the world's oldest map carved on it. But who built it, and what was it used for? The discovery of the monument. In 1963, a megalithic monument known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal, which stood on the banks of the Tagus River, disappeared under the water of the newly constructed reservoir northeast of Extremadura, a region of western Spain bordering Portugal on its western side. After the construction, only the tips of the largest megaliths were occasionally visible above the waterline. Surprisingly, there seems to be no outcry at the submergence of this ancient monument, certainly nowhere near the level of the reaction of archaeologists, historians, and the public if the government planned to do something similar today. But the Dolmen of Guadalperal is far from being the only ancient monument in Spain which has become submerged over the last few decades. Spanish archaeologist Primitiva Buena Ramirez commented that you couldn't believe how many authentic archaeological and historic gems are submerged under Spain's man-made lakes. Enrique Carrillo Cuenca, a researcher from the Spanish National Research Council, added, "We know dolmens submerged in reservoirs in other points of the Tagus, such as Guadancil, a few kilometers downstream from the Guadalperal. In 2019, it was revealed in the media that Spain's extremely dry summer had caused the waters of Valdecañas Reservoir to recede, uncovering the dolmen, which had largely been forgotten about by local inhabitants. Angel Castano, resident of a nearby village and president of a local history and cultural society, said of the discovery, "All my life, people have told me about the dolmen. I'd seen parts of it peeking out from the water before, but this is the first time I've seen it in full. It's spectacular because you can appreciate the entire complex for the first time in decades. We grew up hearing about the legend of the treasure hidden beneath the lake, and now we can finally get to view them. There certainly may have been treasures buried beneath the stones once upon a time, but for us now, the treasure are the stones themselves." Unfortunately, the submergence in water for so long has damaged parts of the monument. The engravings on one of the porous granite stones have eroded. Others show signs of erosion too and have fallen over or are already beginning to split. The dolmen had first been excavated between 1925 and 1927 by German archaeologist Hugo Obermeier, but it wasn't until 4 decades later that Obermeier's report on his excavations of the ancient structure was finally published. The excavations also uncovered artifacts thought to have been used by the builders of the monument, which suggested that they had lived nearby during its construction. The site would have been created over thousands of years using granite transported from kilometers away. Like Stonehenge, the megaliths formed a sun temple and burial ground. They seemed to have a religious but also economic purpose, being at one of the few points of the river where it was possible to cross, so it was a sort of trading hub. The dolmen of the Guadalparal consists of about 140 granite boulders, the highest of which reach 6.6 feet in height, arranged in an 80-foot 5-diameter concentric circle. Archaeologists believe, like Castano, that the monument was probably used as both a temple and a cemetery between 4000 and 2500 BC. At an early stage in its development, the monument consisted of tall, upright stones known as menhirs, which were topped by horizontal slabs of stone to form an enclosed single-chambered tomb known as a dolmen. An engraved menhir stood at the structure's entrance. An ancient map. The engraved stone at the entrance of the dolmen of Guadalparal has become the source of much controversy in recent months. The stone bears an engraving of a human figure on one side and on the other a wavy symbol, which could represent a snake or perhaps the nearby Tagus River. Angel Castano believes the winding line on the stone represents what would have been the world's first map. He believes that the curves may correspond to the meanders of the Tagus River and may have been used as a guide to navigate it. The Tagus River is the longest river on the Iberian Peninsula, flowing 626 miles, generally in a western direction. Up until the Roman period, it's believed that the area where the dolmen of Guadalparal is located was the only natural ford on the river, hence its vital importance. Indeed, the presence of numerous ancient remains in the area testifies to this importance. The ancient Roman city of Augustobriga stood here, but like the dolmen of Guadalparal, was submerged by water in the early 1960s when the Valdecanachas reservoir was built. Other Extremadura dolmens. The region of Extremadura possesses many other prehistoric monuments, including dolmens extremely similar in design to that at Guadalparal. Indeed, there are 41 examples in a small area around the towns of Valencia de Alcantara and San Vicente de Alcantara in western Extremadura, close to the Portuguese border. Indeed, it contains the largest collection of dolmens in the Iberian Peninsula. 33 of these monuments are constructed in granite, while 8 were made using slate. The Dolmen del Melizo is located in the village of Asenya de la Borrega in the province of Cáceres in Spain. It's one of the only dolmens in Extremadura where the chamber is still covered by its original overhanging capstone. The granite slab dolmen has an oval chamber and consists of 8 supporting stones, some of which are unfortunately broken. But prehistoric dolmens are not confined to the Iberian Peninsula. They are found in a variety of places throughout the world. The highest concentration of dolmens is in northwest Europe, especially in Brittany, France, southwestern Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands. They are also known from parts of Africa and Asia. The dolmens of northwest Europe were built in the early Neolithic period, which began in Brittany about 5000 BC and in Britain, Ireland and southern Scandinavia about 4000 BC. The Breton word dolmen was originally used to describe a variety of megalithic monuments all over the world, but although there is considerable diversity in the monument types, they nevertheless share many common characteristics. All dolmens consist of a large capstone or capstones supported by a number of smaller, upright stones. This arrangement of stones creates an enclosed chamber area. Excavations have shown that the majority of dolmens were used for the burial of the dead. In some of these monuments, the remains of numerous people were discovered, mixed together in a communal deposit. Archaeologists believe these collections of bones may represent ancestral remains and that dolmens were not only burial sites but also primitive temples where the ancestors may have been venerated. One of the most puzzling aspects of the dolmens is the massive size of the stones, particularly the capstone or capstones used to construct them. For some reason, the builders chose the largest and heaviest stones they could find, the majority of which they dressed and shaped before putting them in place. How and why they did this is still a perplexing mystery to archaeologists. Unfortunately, the future of the dolmen of Guadalparal is still uncertain. Castano has organized a group of concerned local residents who are campaigning to have the stone monument moved to a site on dry land before the waters rise again. And they are lost for who knows how long and perhaps damaged beyond repair. Castano explained, "If we miss the chance, it could be years before they are revealed again. And the stones, which are granite and therefore porous, are already showing signs of erosion and cracking. So if we don't act now, it will be too late. It isn't a difficult thing to move them. We have machinery now to do that. Let's just hope that there is the political will to save them while we can." Castano and his group created an online petition to save the monument, which obtained over 44,000 signatures. However, the Spanish Ministries of Culture and Sport and Ecological Transition, along with a team from the University of Extremadura, decided that the transportation of the megaliths would damage the dolmen. So the dolmen of Guadalparal remains where it is, waiting to be submerged once again beneath the waters of the Val de Cañas Reservoir.